Welcome to the Chronicles Reports. I am your host, Chronicles. Today, we are dissecting a seismic shift in contemporary history, a moment where the rhetoric of global titans collided with the cold, hard reality of geopolitical pragmatism. Not long ago, the Western world was trembling. For decades following the Cold War, from the plains of Ukraine to the waters of the South China Sea, a new shadow loomed, the axis of upheaval. This was the term coined for the four-way alignment between China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Analysts warned of a coordinated effort to dismantle the US-led global order at an unprecedented scale. But as we stand in early March of 2026, that axis has been put to the ultimate test. Right now, American Israeli operations are active across Iran, and a growing coalition of international powers has concluded that the Iranian regime must go. The world waited for the Axis to strike back, expecting a massive, coordinated response from the world's largest nuclear arsenal in Russia and the economic titan of China. Yet the silence is deafening. In Iran's ultimate moment of need, its allies were nowhere to be found. Today, we explore the historical, cultural, and linguistic roots of this failed alliance. We will analyze why the axis of upheaval was in many ways a geopolitical mirage. To understand the present, we must look at the history of the argument. The term axis of upheaval carries deep linguistic and historical roots. By using the word axis, Western analysts intentionally evoked the memory of the 1940s Tripartite Pact. Defense experts recently argued that the alignment between Russia, China, and Iran in the mid-2020s was actually greater than that between Japan, Germany, and Italy at the start of World War II. However, there is a fundamental distinction between geopolitical collaboration and a formal alliance. Russia and China are not formal allies in the way we understand NATO, while their interests cluster in the same direction. Leading to shared military hardware and diplomatic backing, they lack mutual defense clauses. The Axis was never a brotherhood. It was a marriage of convenience. When the US and Israel launched their offensive, many wondered if this would be the line in the sand for Moscow and Beijing. It wasn't. Despite the limitless rhetoric, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping have reached a grim consensus. The loss of Iran is unfortunate, but it is simply not worth going to war over. This illustrates a core fact behind the personalities involved. Their primary influence is national preservation, not ideological loyalty. Let's analyze the Russian position. Vladimir Putin has spent years positioning himself as the archenemy of the West. But look at the contemporary history of Russian intervention, or the lack thereof. In recent years, the world has seen a pattern of Russia abandoning its partners. Armenia, Russia stood by as Azerbaijan conquered Nagorno-Karabakh. Syria, when Bashar al-Assad faced a rebel offensive in late 2024, Putin offered him an apartment in Russia rather than military salvation. Venezuela, when Nicolas Maduro was removed in early 2026, Russia's condemnation was weak and signaled no intent to intervene. Russia's refusal to help Iran is not a lack of will, but a lack of capacity. After 4 years of war in Ukraine, Russia lacks the equipment and military infrastructure to battle for air superiority 3,000 kilometers away from Moscow. Furthermore, we must look at the political impact on daily life. Iran has begun attacking energy infrastructure in the Persian Gulf, specifically targeting Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the Emirates. These are nations Russia needs as partners. If Russia helps Iran, it risks alienating the very Gulf allies that help stabilize global energy markets, a factor that impacts the heating and fuel costs of every person watching this broadcast. Behind the scenes, the story is even more stark. While Russian state media condemned the supreme leader as murder, Putin reportedly refused to participate in calls with the Iranian military. Reports suggest that when Iran requested the activation of S-400 missile systems in Syria to interfere with U.S. operations, Russia allegedly responded by deactivating its radar systems instead. Now we turn to Beijing. China's situation is different. Unlike Russia, China is not bogged down in a foreign war. It has the troops and the high-tech hardware to intervene. China also depends on Iran for 10% of its seaborne oil. So why the hesitation? It comes down to two fundamental rules in Chinese contemporary history. Rule 1. China does not go to war for anyone. They haven't engaged in armed conflict since the 1970s. Rule 2. Don't touch China's stuff. While China committed to a $400 billion investment in Iran, historical facts show that less than 1% of that money was actually delivered. Iran is a rounding error for Beijing. Moreover, Iran is currently violating China's rule number 2 by blowing up energy installations in the Gulf specifically. A refinery that supplies 17% of Saudi oil and a Qatari terminal supplying 20% of the world. SLNG Iran is the one touching China's stuff. China receives double the oil from the other Gulf states than it does from Iran. From a cultural and linguistic perspective, Beijing's support is. They are currently negotiating to send Iran more weaponry, but analysts argue this is less about defense and more about marketing. If Iranian forces score a hit with Chinese tech, Beijing can market that equipment to other nations, as they did after the 2025 Pakistan-India conflict. What does this mean for us, the citizens of the world? This historical event illustrates that the axis of upheaval was a rhetorical tool more than a functional reality. The impact on modern politics is a return to brutal realism. Smaller nations that once thought they could rely on the big three, Russia, China, and Iran to counter Western influence are now seeing that when the pressure mounts, they are discarded. This affects our daily lives through the lens of global stability. The failure of this alliance to materialize means the conflict remains localized rather than escalating into a third world war involving nuclear powers. However, the targeting of Gulf energy assets by a desperate Iranian regime still threatens the continuity of the global oil market, a market that China knows needs customers and continuity more than any ideological victory. In the final analysis, Russia and China have delivered Iran the ultimate geopolitical insult. They don't hate Iran. They just don't care enough to save it. Iran has been deemed too inconvenient to defend and not valuable enough to save. This is the reality of the 2020s. Alliances are written in ink, but actions are written in blood and oil. As we watch the map of the Middle East being redrawn, we must remember that in the game of high-stakes geostrategy, there are no friends-only interests. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Make sure to stay informed, stay critical, and keep watching the reports that shape our world. I am Chronicles, and this has been the Chronicles Reports.